Centre here at the University of Melbourne. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you here during National Science Week and the Science Festival. Happy National Science Week, everybody. My name is Dr. Jenny Martin. I'm a neurologist by training, but these days I put all of my energies into teaching science students here at the University of Melbourne how to communicate more effectively. And at the same time, I spend a lot of time each week at 3RRR FM community radio talking about science. So I get to be Dr. Jen every week and come up with all sorts of interesting things about science to tell people about. And I have to say, I think one of the major reasons, surely, why Melbourne is once again the world's most beautiful city is because so many people here like science. Yes? Woo! Go Melbourne! So, of course, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. We're Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. And I'm very proud to welcome you on behalf of the Melbourne Network Society Institute and the Melbourne Neuroscience Institute to today's event. So what's happening today is very exciting because we have researchers from 3 incredible virtual reality research projects here to tell you about what they do. Now, when I think virtual reality, I think about the times that I've talked about it on the radio. One of those times was to talk about how it can be very useful for treating people with arachnophobia. You can get used to having a virtual spider on your hand, or easily then you can get used to having a real huntsman on your hand. I would certainly put my hand up for going with virtual spider, I have to say. But also I read some research about virtual reality when it came to people with phantom limb syndrome, which was fascinating. But what I hadn't really thought about was the fact that virtual reality can be applied to so many more general situations and so many more people in their everyday lives than something as specific as those two. So the way today is going to work is we have 3 research projects to showcase for you. I'm going to invite the researchers up one at a time, and they get about 15 minutes each to tell you about their research. And then they've been instructed to leave enough time so they can all come up the front and we can have a discussion and we will welcome your questions. Now, anyone in the room who is a Twitter user who just can't wait until the end to ask their burning question and wants to get it on record, if you send out a tweet with the hashtag BrainVR, as in V-R-A-I-N, VR for virtual reality, we'll be gathering those and I will answer as many of those as we have time for. Everybody happy with that? Yes? Excellent. All right, we're going to invite our first speakers. We have Dr. Greg Wadley, who's a lecturer in the School of Computing and Information Systems here at the University of Melbourne. And we have Dr. Sarah Bennell, who is a Senior Research Fellow and a Clinical Psychologist at Origin, which is the National Centre of Excellence in Youth Mental Health. And they've got some amazing research to tell us about. So please join me in welcoming Greg.
Is that little clicker working?
Yeah. This is you guys, yeah.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you. Hi, I'm Greg. I work in computing and information systems here at Melbourne. I'll be joined very soon by Sarah, who is, as you just heard, a researcher and clinical psychologist at Origin, the National Centre. I always have to read this, it's such a long title. It's the National Centre of Excellence in Youth Mental Health, just up here in Parkville. So Sarah and I are part of a larger group who've been working on technologies for youth mental health for some years now. And I'll set the scene by talking about our work in general and also other work that's happened in virtual reality for mental health. And then Sarah will come and talk about our specific project. So why mental health? Why do we care about youth mental health? Well, mental illness represents an astonishing 30% of the non-fatal disease burden in Australia. And it's primarily a problem of young people. So half of all psychiatric disorders begin before the age of 14, 3/4 of them begin by the age of 25. And yet, despite or because of that prevalence, a lot of young people don't get the help that they need. So in our project, at Origin, research at Origin and elsewhere has shown that the best approach to psychiatric disorders in the young is early intervention. And what we are doing in our project is exploring ways for technology to do that, to fit that gap. So we have a cross-disciplinary team. We have technology and psychology researchers here at Melbourne, at Origin, and also at the Australian Catholic University. And we like to inspire ourselves by wondering, what will a mental health clinic of the future look like? Or in other words, will mental health care in the future look just like mental health care does today? Or will the way we deliver mental health care, will our approaches evolve? And in particular, will emerging technologies be part of mental health care? What are some of the exciting technologies that have been coming out in the last 10 years or so? And we think the answer to this is obviously yes. We think that technology will transform this area of life just as it's transforming almost all other areas. So since 2009, our team have been working mostly on web and phone apps for use in youth mental health. There's actually quite a lot of research around the world in this area. So primarily looking at phones, smartphones currently, and how they can help people's mental health. How can they be part of mental health care? And a lot of the work has as its fundamental rationale using technology to improve the delivery and the accessibility of mental health care. So I mentioned before that not enough young people get the care that they need. This is largely because there are simply not enough clinicians and bricks and mortar clinics to provide all the services that are needed. But it's not just a lack of resources. There's actually can be challenges, even if a young person can get a place at a clinic. There can be challenges in going to the clinic and undergoing that therapy. So a big one is stigma. A lot of young people don't want to identify as a mental health patient, and that demotivates them from getting out and getting to their clinical appointments. If you don't live near the centre of a large city, it can be a challenge just to get to appointments. For young people especially who don't have cars, who might live a long distance, who need to take time off work and school, etc. And if you are suffering certain mental disorders, just that journey itself can be a challenge, dealing with crowds, dealing with public transport, etc. Specifically, what we're going to talk about today is that we've been, in the past few months, asking whether virtual reality can be useful for youth mental health. So some really amazing VR systems, commercial systems have appeared just in the past couple of years. I'm sure everyone here has heard of those, but I'll talk about those briefly. What VR can do is deliver a very compelling and a very memorable experience, which is especially appealing to young people. They're a bit like video games, and young people tend to take to this, and they tend to take to a VR experience more than they take to listening to an adult drone on at them. So this kind of experience can be very appealing in just the way that a lot of current treatment approaches are not so appealing. So what is VR? Well, primarily VR, and I've got one here, but I didn't bring it up with me. It's sitting down on the floor there. I'm going to pass that round when we've finished today. All VR uses a head-mounted display, and the purpose of the head-mounted display is to put a couple of screens right in front of your eyes. The images are slightly different, so you get stereopsis and you are seeing a 3D image. You feel you're immersed in it because the screens are so close to your face. But most importantly, the headset is tracking your head movements. So as you move your head around, the image is changing in front of your eyes, just as the real world does as we move around. Our image is constantly changing. So that gives a very natural, very realistic and very compelling experience. So the big commercial systems that have come out recently, the one that's probably most famous is the Oculus Rift. That's the one that everyone in this picture is wearing, and it is currently owned by Facebook, whose boss is looking very happy that everyone in this picture is wearing the Oculus Rift. A slightly more high-end version is the Vive by the HTC company, and that's the one we're using in our project. So this diagram shows that the Vive not only has the headset tracking your movements, but there are other sensors in the room so that you can actually walk around a reasonable, it's like a lounge room sized area, and you can crouch and you can get up on your toes, and your view of the world is changing. And so it's, and in addition to that, you've got hand controllers so you can actually interact with the virtual scene. There's also phone-based virtual reality, and I've brought one of those today. So Samsung have the Gear VR, Google have recently announced the Daydream platform. In this case, the image you're looking at is being calculated, produced by your phone, not a high-end PC. So the image is not as good, but you're not tethered to a PC. You can experience this kind of VR anywhere and any time. What kind of apps and software is appearing in VR? Well, the current crop of VR systems have emerged from the world of gaming. So unsurprisingly, a lot of the software that's available is games in all the usual genres that you would expect. But really there's an emphasis on experience. When you're in VR, you really feel like you've experienced something that is being simulated. So we see Job Simulator, for example, which is actually a comedy app, but it's quite interesting. So you get to simulate what it's like to work in a 7-Eleven. You can experience climbing Mount Everest. You can experience interacting with animals, and there are many, many other quite interesting experiences to be had with VR. The HTC Vive that we're using is pretty fiddly to set up, and there's a lot of bits and it's hard to move around. So we didn't set this up here today. If you would like to have a go at one, it will be set up this Sunday at the Melbourne Uni Open Day. So please come along to Melbourne Uni Open Day and find the engineering faculty and come and play with our VR unit. But there's a lot of interest in using VR for mental health. This is a recent review paper by Daniel Freeman at Oxford. And the point he makes quite strongly in this paper is that the underlying logic here is that a lot of mental health disorders really represent an individual's not effective response to some situation or phenomenon or social scenario, some context that they have to deal with in their life or have dealt with in the past. And so a lot of therapy consists of having a conversation which involves thinking about a memory of some situation that the person has dealt with. What VR enables you to do is to simulate that situation. So instead of talking about a memory, the person is actually reliving that situation. And in that way, the person can habituate to the situation. They can be taught better ways to deal with it. So a lot of the work in VR for mental health has been exposure therapy, where you expose someone to a source of some kind of anxiety and allow them to overcome that, their anxiety to that situation. So we see VR for phobia related to heights, related to spiders, which Dr. Jen mentioned already, to flying. In a similar vein, there's work mostly in the US on recreating combat scenes to treat post-traumatic stress disorder in ex-military personnel. So these systems here are all in use now in clinics and hospitals. Going beyond phobia, there's work by Daniel Freeman, in fact, on using VR to treat paranoia in people with psychosis. So here the setting is a social one, and they've got quite interesting simulations of public transport and bars where you walk into the bar and people look at you funny, and so there's confronting social scenarios and the patient learns to deal with that. VR is being used for pain relief in accident victims, to reduce anxiety pre and post surgery, to induce desirable mental traits such as empathy and prosociality, and to induce self-compassion in people whose mental disorder leads them to be overly self-critical. I'll just mention that what a lot of these have in common is that the VR is simulating something in the world that someone is having a non-effective response to, a response that is not useful to the individual. And therefore, the Freeman review shows that a lot of the work on VR for mental health is around anxiety. I think over half of the published work on VR for mental health is to do with anxiety. There's less on psychosis and almost none on depression and other mental health conditions. And it's psychosis and depression that Sarah and I and our colleagues are addressing. And to do that, we're not emulating a situation in the real world, like up there, but rather we're emulating processes inside the mind itself, and allowing people to understand their own mental processes and to deal with those processes in a more effective way. So we've got financial support and other kinds of support from MNSI here at Melbourne, and that's allowed us to buy some great equipment and get some apps built. And Sarah will join me now and explain how we're building those apps.
Thanks, Greg. So, hi everybody. So, as Greg said, this work that we've been doing over the last couple of years was really partly inspired by seeing being in a VR experience of the brain, and I did this a couple of years ago. So I put on my headset and I dived into a brain and I looked around this brain. It's if any of you who will have done it know what an amazing experience it is to be in a VR space. So you can look everywhere, and I was in this brain, and so I could see the dendrites, the axons. It was an incredibly engaging and educational experience. So that inspired us to think about what we want, how we want to engage young people and teach them about their mental health. And instead of doing that about the brain, we decided to do the same thing, and it's quite a big challenge, to try and do the same thing in relation to the mind. So the mind is not a real thing. It doesn't have axons and dendrites and neurons. The mind is a conceptual place. It's a very esoteric idea when you start thinking about it. It is made up of our thoughts, our memories, our feelings, our learnings, and also all the processes that go on between all of these things. And when you think about it, our mind is an incredibly important part of our lives, and we can't see it, we can't touch it, we know nothing. Everything we know about our minds, we infer from information we get from ourselves. We can touch the brain, we can't touch our mind. And actually in therapy, we do a lot of trying to talk to people about their minds and how their minds work. And that involves a lot of talking and explaining. And adults in therapy, they can usually, they're relatively happy to do that. Young people sitting and talking about something that is esoteric and conceptual as a mind gets a bit boring and a bit static and a bit unengaging. And we have been thinking about ways that we could make this process more alive for young people, and this is where our project is going. So the idea is that we're going to be able to transport young people into their minds and learn about all the processes that are going on in their minds. And you can see here that I've got a clip of the movie Inside Out. And Inside Out did this really well. So when you think about it, what you were seeing in Inside Out, for those of you who have seen it, and for any who haven't, I strongly recommend it, was a metaphor for how emotions work. Have you seen that? No. We've lost a... Thank you. I'll be able to do that. Thank you. So the MIND project is designed to be used in the clinic, so in therapy with a young person as part of a face-to-face consultation, with a series of apps that we can use for young people in a situation where we think that a certain app or a certain piece of learning would be helpful to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run you through the first 3 apps that we're prototyping at the moment. So this process of trying to to embody this disembodied thing that is the mind has taken a lot of thinking, and we've gone through lots of thinking and lots of iterations, lots of talking to young people about how we might do this. And the 3 apps I'm going to show you very briefly today are all based on the simple but very revolutionary idea that we have thoughts, and that they are very important in the way that we approach the world. So we all have thoughts. Our thoughts are running through our minds all the time. Sometimes we're aware of them, sometimes we're not aware of them. And psychologists know a lot about thoughts because there is a lot of research that goes into what these thoughts are that are going through our minds. And we know from a lot of research that that having more negative thoughts and having thoughts that work in a certain way mean that we're more likely to develop things like depression and psychosis. So being aware that we have what we call negative automatic thoughts and knowing what they are and how they work is it's one of the building blocks of cognitive behavioural therapies. And so it's a very big part of a lot of the kinds of psychological therapies that we do for young people. So all of the apps that I'm going to talk to you about are about helping young people to understand that they have thoughts and that some of them might be negative and automatic. So the first one is we call the Train of Thought app. So in this app, what we do is we start in the clinic, talking face-to-face with a young person, not in the VR space, and we talk to them about negative automatic thoughts, and we start to generate what some of them might be. And then the young person puts on a headset, and they come onto the platform of the train station. So the platform is a metaphor. The train station is a metaphor for their mind. And so they can look at the train station, they can look around. It's a very busy station. It has lots of lines, lots of trains going backwards and forwards and around and about. And they are observing the train station. They then start, as the trains go past them, they start to see that there are billboards on the trains. And on the billboards is text, the text of the automatic thoughts that we have generated in the face-to-face therapy session. So what that means is that young people start to see that their thoughts go past them. They go past, they stop sometimes they're slow, sometimes they're fast, sometimes they're near, sometimes they're far away, sometimes they go round and round and round. And they start to feel that seeing those thoughts over and over starts to give them feelings. They start to see the relationship between their thoughts, the automatic thoughts that they might be having, and their feelings. So that's one simple example. The second one is very similar, and this one, instead of the text of their thoughts being on the side of a train, they're actually on a balloon, like a kid's party balloon. So again, they can see their thoughts. Now, the thing about the balloon app is that we can actually, because we have in the program we're using, the setup we're using, we have, what are they called, Greg?
Hand controls.
Hand controls. I'm not good on the technicality. They have hand controllers, so young people can do things with the balloons. The balloons are physically in front of them. They're in their VR space with their balloons, so they can push them away or they can pull them towards them. As they push them away, it might be that they find they bounce back, because sometimes if we push away our thoughts bounce back again. So there are ways that we can interact with, they can interact with their thoughts in ways that we know thoughts work from many, many decades of previous research on that we know about thoughts. So the final app is a very new one that we've just started playing around with recently, and this one we call Thought Monsters. And this has been designed because we wanted to have a go at presenting young people's thoughts to them in a way that wasn't text-based. So in this app, both the young person and the therapist put on a headset and are in the VR space. So in this picture, you can see the panda is actually the young person, so they don't see themselves, but the therapist, when the therapist is in this VR space, they can see the young person. And the therapist is the monster. And the monster actually has audio, and the monster can say the thoughts. And this is much closer to how our thoughts actually happen in our minds. They're not visual, we don't see them in text, we usually hear them in our minds. And so what the therapist can do in this situation is speak the thoughts in a monster voice, so their voice is distorted through the system. They can then switch out of that and talk to the young person from the therapist's voice. So there can be some therapeutic work being done in the VR space with the thought monsters. So this is another one that we're playing around with. All of these apps we're co-developing with young people in order to get their input into how helpful, how do they make sense, are they engaging? So those are three of the things that we're prototyping at the moment. So we're hoping that the mind landscape will get bigger, that we'll have many more apps that will model a lot of different psychological processes, and that then will mean that we can have a suite of them that we can offer to young people. So once we have that, we'll also be testing these apps with young people to make sure that they're engaging and acceptable, but also to see what impacts they actually have on young people's mental health problems. So that's all that I was going to tell you, and I look forward to discussing after the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Greg and Sarah. Did you want to pass it around now, Greg, or just hold it up so people can see what we're talking about?
I'm happy to pass this around, but it might give them away.
Okay, so maybe we can have a look at it afterwards. Fantastic. All right, we're going to move now from youth mental health to the other end of the human lifespan. Very pleased to invite Dr. Jenny Waycott, excuse me, who's also a lecturer here at the University of Melbourne in the Department of Computing Information Systems. Just like Greg and Jacob, they share an office, so let's see if their ideas have rubbed off on one another, who knows what has come. And Jenny's going to be talking to us about using virtual reality for social participation and enrichment in old age. And just remember, you're about to be enthralled by a whole new story. So hold on to any questions that have come up from Greg and Sarah. And if you think you're going to forget them by the end, then please tweet them to us now so we can put them to the panel at the end. Thank you, Jenny.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk today about two projects that I'm involved in that align with the topic of my talk, which is virtual reality for social participation and enrichment in old age. One of those projects is currently in progress, and the other one is actually in the planning stages. It's something I'll be working on over the next few years. So I'm talking very much from the perspective today of future research and work in progress. But before I get into future work, I want to start by going back in time and telling you a little bit about me and how I came to be doing this work. Going right back to the start of my academic career, it all began back here at the University of Melbourne, where I did my undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. Fast forward 20 years or so, and I'm now a lecturer in Computing and Information Systems, which is part of the Melbourne School of Engineering. And I sometimes wonder, how did that art psychology student become a lecturer in a computer science department? And the answer is that I discovered this field of research called human-computer interaction. So this is a very interdisciplinary area. It draws on expertise in computing and IT and brings that together with social science and humanities perspectives. The broad aim of this area of research is to understand people's needs, goals, values, activities and so on, and to use that understanding to inform the design and evaluation of new technologies, ultimately to develop technologies that improve people's lives in some way. And so that's the perspective that I'm coming from in my work. And I've just included an image there. That was the conference that I attended where I first discovered human-computer interaction and kind of found my academic tribe. So still sticking with the past for a few minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about work that I've done previously, which forms a backdrop to the work that I'm doing now. So in 2012, I joined Computing and Information Systems as a research fellow, working on this project, Growing Older and Staying Connected, Touchscreen Technologies for Ameliorating Older People's Experience of Social Isolation. The project was funded by the Australian Research Council. It also had some support from what was then the IBIS, and I can't remember, Institute for a Broadband Enabled Society, which has now become the Melbourne Network Society Institute. The project was a fantastic project to be involved in. It had a very noble aim, which was to identify how we could use communication technologies, and particularly touchscreen technologies, so looking at iPads in particular, how we could use those technologies to alleviate older people's experiences of social isolation. So we were looking in particular at older people who lived independently at home. We were working with an aged care provider, Benetas, and we were working with clients of Benetas who lived at home but used Benetas's home care services, and they were clients that Benetas had identified as being at risk of social isolation. So they were people who didn't have as many opportunities to connect with others as they would have liked. And we trialled a photo sharing app with small groups of people who used the app to share photos and messages with each other, and through that process they were able to build new friendships and build connections. It was a great project. It had some really positive outcomes, but there were also some challenges and limitations. And one of those limitations is that there's only so much you can do with an iPad app. Photo sharing was a fantastic means of communication. It was a great way to enable people to get to know each other, but it was often asynchronous, so people weren't always using the app at the same time, and therefore it was very difficult to create that really strong sense of social presence, so to create that sense that people were together and engaging in the same activities at the same time. And that meant we couldn't really replicate the kind of social activities that people used to enjoy, like, for example, going to a book club or going to play cards with a group of friends and so on. So as this project was drawing to a close, we started to look at what newer technologies might offer in terms of social participation for older people. And we were interested in particular at the opportunities that virtual reality provided for creating a richer social experience. And that led us to this project, which is Aging and Avatars. We're looking at how people design avatars to represent themselves in virtual worlds, and we're looking at co-designing virtual experiences that provide that rich social participation with our older participants. As you can see from this slide, it's a very large interdisciplinary team. We're bringing together people with expertise in ageing and social work, along with people with more technical backgrounds. And to give you an idea about the work we're doing in this project, I'm just going to play a short video.
The Aging and Avatars project's aim is to use participatory research methods to develop technologies that help older adults who may be socially isolated to participate in social activities. To help with this aim, we've created 2 technology explorer circles who are working with us to trial ways that virtual reality technology and avatars can be used to facilitate meaningful social interactions in virtual worlds.
I think it's going to be a real necessity to be on top of some technology for healthy ageing. Otherwise, I think we're going to be isolated from so much of what goes on in the world around us now. If we can work and help in the development of something that's much easier to use, then that'll be good.
I didn't know, for example, what an avatar was. I didn't know what virtual reality really was. I didn't know how you used virtual reality goggles. I think it's enormously beneficial technology.
So we're working with groups of older people aged over 70 who have an interest in technology, and we call these groups the Technology Explorer Circles. When we recruited our participants for this project, we didn't specify what we meant by having an interest in technology, and we've ended up with a very diverse range of participants with diverse IT backgrounds, which is actually a really good thing for our project. So we've got people ranging from computing pioneers who used computers in the 1960s and have been working in the IT industry for decades, to people who are fairly recent adopters and only use their first computer or tablet device or smartphone in the last 5 years or so. So we've been running workshops with these participants, so we have monthly workshops which started in December last year, and in these workshops we've been introducing VR experiences and getting people to reflect on how they might use the VR in the future, how they might design VR for other people in their situation. And we've also been looking at how they design their avatars and getting them to use avatars to represent themselves in those worlds. And we're going to be, in the next few months, working with these participants to co-design virtual reality experiences that aim to provide a social participation. So we're moving into the design process now after kind of doing a bit of a familiarisation process. And during these workshops, our participants have been really great at critiquing the technology and really exploring both the opportunities that the technology might provide and the limitations of it. So that's the past. Oh, sorry, that's the present. I've done the past, the present, and now I'm up to the future. So this is work that I'll be doing over the next 4 years. I've been lucky enough to be able to extend my research in this area with a grant from the Australian Research Council. So the project is going to be looking at emerging technologies for enrichment in old age, a critical perspective. To explain what I mean by that, I wanted to just break down the title and define each of the terms. Emerging technologies that are new and are starting to appear in the ageing space, things like virtual reality, but I'm also looking at social robots and other kinds of technologies that might appear over the next few years. When I talk about enrichment, technologies for enrichment, that means that I'm not looking at technologies that are used for monitoring and surveillance or things like emergency alarms, which are often used in the aged care space. Instead, I'm looking at technologies that are used to provide social and emotional well-being and to enhance social and emotional well-being, and to provide opportunities to participate in meaningful activities. When I use the term old age, I'm looking in particular at people aged 80 plus, so people in their 80s and 90s, perhaps beyond, and looking at how these technologies can be used with this age group. And when I say I'm adopting a critical perspective for this research, I don't mean that I'm planning to criticise all the technology that I'm investigating. I'm looking at it from different perspectives and aiming to get an in-depth understanding of people's experiences with these technologies and looking at both the benefits and the opportunities they provide. So the reason I became interested in this area and looking at these emerging technologies used for enrichment in old age, I was putting together materials for a subject that I'm teaching called Technology and Ageing, which is part of the Master of Ageing course at the University of Melbourne. And I came across a lot of newspaper articles and media reports about virtual reality in aged care. So there was a lot of interest in VR being used in residential aged care facilities. A lot of hype, a lot of excitement about the possibilities of VR, but very limited academic research in the area. So I really wanted to interrogate what was happening, what was beneficial about VR in this space, and what perhaps might the challenges be, and how could we ensure that these emerging technologies are used ethically and in a way that does guarantee that there are, social benefits are realised, because this is a very sensitive setting in which these technologies are being used. So I've been having some conversations with aged care providers about their use of VR in aged care, and these are some of the reasons that VR is being used and is being embraced in this area. It's being used as diversional therapy, especially with dementia patients. So diversional therapy is the leisure and recreational activities that are offered in aged care, residential aged care facilities. Because VR is an immersive experience, and we heard from Greg before what VR actually involves, and it does mean that you're sort of shut off from the world around you and you're immersed in a virtual environment. Because of that immersion, it can have a meditative effect and it can be relaxing, and this can be very helpful in aged care facilities where residents might be feeling anxious and might display some difficult behaviours. It provides opportunities to reminisce over past experiences, to talk about past experiences, and also opportunities to experience what life was like and the activities that people can no longer engage in. For example, you might have somebody who wants to do mountain climbing, or somebody who wants to visit a city that they can no longer visit because they can't travel anymore. So I have a video that demonstrates this. This is from a Channel 7 news report.
For dementia patients, stimulating their minds and sparking a trip down memory lane can have real benefits, helping them remember and communicate. Now, virtual reality is giving some aged care residents those experiences without leaving their armchairs.
Herman Vucci is getting ready for the journey of a lifetime, a trip to New York at the age of 92.
I'm going to pop these on your head.
The Medicare.
But there's no long flight ahead for Herman. He's travelling virtually with these 360-degree interactive glasses, which can take its user from the plains of Africa to the North Pole.
And it enables them a very safe, easy environment to just wear this very comfortable headset and feel like they're in this beautiful, tranquil place.
Residents with dementia at Mercy Place care homes are taking part in a trial designed to trigger memories, emotions and, most importantly, good old-fashioned happiness.
What a fantastic sight.
You might think you're done.
I just wanted to give you a snippet of that to just illustrate how VR is being used. There are, of course, challenges. So some of those challenges are fairly obvious, like it's relatively expensive as far as an activity goes in a residential aged care facility. Resource intensive, so it does require one-on-one facilitation from care staff. Care staff are already very stretched in this space, so it's actually quite challenging to ensure these activities are used effectively, because you do need to make use of care staff. There are challenges about potentially causing confusion, especially for people with dementia and especially as people reach advanced stages of dementia. So it's probably not appropriate for people as they are reaching advanced stages of dementia, but rather for people in the earlier stages. And finally, how do we ensure that the VR experiences that are offered are appropriate to the individual person? People in aged care have a variety of diverse interests, and how do we ensure that the experiences that are often they are pre-developed experiences, they haven't actually been designed with the people. How do we ensure these experiences are tailored to individual interests and individual needs? So, for example, one of the experiences that is currently offered is a calming underwater environment, and it's supposed to be meditative and create that sort of calming experience. But if you had a person who is scared of water, who's perhaps had a near drowning experience in the past, that calming experience could become a very traumatic experience. So it does require quite a lot of caution to make sure that it is used effectively and appropriately. And so the work that I'm doing over the next few years will be looking at these issues. I'm going to be looking at examples of good practice in designing and using VR for enrichment in aged care. I'm going to be looking at how we can include older adults' perspectives in decisions about designing and deploying VR for enrichment in aged care. So going back to those technology explorer circles that we are using in our current project, can we do something like this in an aged care setting? And how do we ensure the future ethical design of technology-based enrichment experiences for older adults to make sure that when we do introduce these technologies in these settings, we are delivering on the social benefits that we're promising? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to Jenny. Now, do we have Jeanette? Excellent! We have Jeanette, so I'm really thrilled to invite our third and final speaker. Now, remember, if you have questions arising from that fascinating talk from Jenny, please tweet it to us with the hashtag BrainVR. And he's busily gathering tweets. And now Jeanette's going to talk to us about musical therapy in a virtual reality setting. And just while she's getting ready, I was lucky enough to be sent some links to these research projects in preparation for today, and I went down an absolute rabbit hole online, reading all about it, and music reports and reading all sorts of things, and there's some very fascinating video about this research. So I'm hoping, are we going to have a sing-along?
Maybe.
I
didn't bring my guitar, but there's options. There's options. Yes.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our work in music therapy in virtual environments, but I thought maybe before doing that I'll just give you a little bit of a background about myself and about music therapy. So I've worked as a music therapist in neurorehabilitation for about 20 years now, working with people who've had a brain injury, stroke, spinal cord injury, and more recently degenerative conditions such as dementia and Parkinson's. And so we're using music-based interventions to help people in their rehabilitation journey and to achieve their goals. A few years ago I did a PhD study looking at the effects of group singing, intensive group singing for people with high-level quadriplegia, and looking at how that affected their breathing and their voice. And so that was sort of the inspiration for this virtual reality study. So music therapy. Who's heard of music therapy, just out of interest? Who feels like they kind of get their head around what it is? Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a really quick definition. Basically, it's the clinical and evidence-based use of music to help people to achieve their goals for health and well-being. It's conducted by a credentialed music therapist, and we mostly use live music so that we can adapt that in the clinical setting. Important things to remember are that people of any age or ability can participate in music therapy. It has nothing to do with your musical expertise or background. And also that we distinguish music therapy from music education, teaching people how to play instruments, or performance, like entertaining people or distracting people using music. So it's really a therapy focus. So I wanted to play you a little bit of a clip just to sort of set the scene for our virtual reality in spinal cord injury with music therapy. And I'll just go forward a bit. Ready? Big breath. And I know I'm right. We compared groups of people with quadriplegia who sang together with a music therapist versus people who came together in groups and did other music-related activities. And we found that there was a significant improvement in their ability to project their voice.
I think for someone in my position who, is going to spend a lot of time in a wheelchair, it is difficult sometimes to move around. Using virtual reality, it makes you not think about your injury. If I had 5 people around me, I'd probably shy away from singing. But using that apparatus that we use, virtual reality, don't have any reservations in singing, because it's like no one's watching you. That's why I tell you, you better be home soon.
Okay, so maybe I'll just go back a step and say, why is singing relevant or important for people with quadriplegia in the beginning? So people who have a high-level spinal cord injury, in addition to losing the function in their arms and legs, also affects the muscles, the primary muscles they use for breathing, so the muscles in their stomach and chest that we able-bodied people use all the time, particularly for coughing and things like that help them to get clear secretions. So they're much more prone to respiratory tract infections and pneumonia and things like that. So it's actually really important for them to have good respiratory function, and also has a secondary effect on their voice. So their voice is softer, and they can't project their voice as much, or they can't shout as loud because they have less air and respiratory support. So because this is a major issue for this population, a major cause of injury and even death, finding interventions that can help improve their respiratory function is really important. So the previous research has shown us that if you do intensive respiratory muscle training, which basically involves breathing into a device against resistance, there are a few different ones on the market. So they've done research with these type of gadgets and shown that you can improve your respiratory strength, but it only lasts while you're doing this every day, 10 minutes a day, you know, and when you stop doing it, the effect goes away. So we're really looking at finding something that could get that kind of effect, and we know that singing requires more air, more greater control over the release of air and greater expiratory effort and greater lung volumes. So we were hoping that doing singing exercises would have a similar effect, and maybe something that could be more sustainable and more something that people can engage into their lifestyle. So the other thing that we found is that disproportionately high numbers of people with quadriplegia live in rural and regional areas, and they're often poorly served by traditional health services. And we had a lot of difficulty getting a large enough sample size for the initial study that we did. So we found some good effects. We found, you know, with the sample size we had of 24 people in this small randomised control trial, that there was an effect of the singing training. It did improve their voice projection, and it had trends towards improving their respiratory function, but our numbers were too small. So we thought, how can we get a bigger number? How can we bring this to more people and see if it works? And because coming in all the way into the hospital from the home, especially with these guys who often live out in the country and all over the place, getting into the hospital with their physical injuries and travel restrictions and things was difficult. So we thought, how can we bring it to them? That's why we thought of, first of all, telehealth, like maybe a Skype type session, and then maybe even to make it a more immersive experience for them to be in a virtual world together singing. But the problem with singing together online is timing, is latency. So I don't know if you've ever tried to sing with someone on Skype, sing happy birthday. It doesn't work because there's the time lag from one computer to another, internet speeds, distance, all of these things throw it out. So it doesn't actually work to do that. So that was our first problem that we tried to solve. And we got some funding from the Melbourne Network Society Institute to basically explore how we can solve these problems, and could we use virtual reality, and would that work for people with spinal cord injuries? Even just from a feasibility perspective, because there's altered sensation for people with a high-level injury, and wearing something on their face, we didn't know how that would feel with that. Some people get nauseous in virtual reality, and we know that people with spinal cord injuries can have blood pressure issues and are more susceptible to things like that. So we really want to tease out all of these things and see if it would actually work. We did some testing late last year at the Royal Talbot Rehabilitation Centre in the spinal rehab ward there. And we found that virtual reality was experienced as a way to escape their current environment and their current physical limitations. And as Steve said, as you heard on the video, it was something that was almost releasing their inhibitions a bit more. They felt a bit more brave to sing rather than eyeballing someone across the room. They were kind of in their own little private space. And the other thing that we've been able to develop is a way to sing together in time enough, so it's under 20 milliseconds, I believe, so it sounds to our ear that it's in time. So we're not able to do that directly through the VR yet, but we've worked out a way to do that through some audio routing software, and it's a low latency USB audio device and a software program called JackTrip. So we use the audio from that and the visuals from the VR, and we put it together. Let's try counting together in time. Just count up to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Jim was out of time, but you were in time.
I didn't get a chance to explain that before it just started, but that was an example of us testing what the timing was like between the three of us, just counting in time over the normal audio. So one way that, one of the therapy activities that we did in my PhD study was what we called sort of like drone singing or a soundscape. So it's just having deep breaths and singing long, sustained notes, and then just when you run out of air, take a breath and sing another one. So that type of singing kind of has a bit of a Gregorian chanty style to it. It's very floaty and there's no timing. So you can do that type of work without the latency issue getting in the way. But one of the most motivating things about singing together in groups is singing your favourite songs together. You know, it's kind of like karaoke. So we wanted to be able to, if we could, get over that time lag issue. But I'll just show you what the drone sort of singing sounds like.
Just have a nice gentle hum. So nice big breath in again, fill up your lungs with air, and just pick any note that's comfortable, just gentle warm up. So big breath in.
So that's got a good therapeutic outcome because we're really working on that maximum phonation and using your full lung of air. But there's only so long you can sing drone for. You need to get onto the good stuff as well. So one more chorus. Knock, knock, knocking on different doors. Knock, knock, knocking on living door. Knock, knock, knocking on different doors. Knock, knock, knocking on living door. So that was singing with the wide network that I described before with Jack Tripp, so we could actually sing in time together. So this is just some quotes from the participants about what the VR experience was like. So when I was in VR, I wasn't thinking about pain or anything like that. I wasn't focusing or concentrating on my disability in sitting in the chair. It was more like, wow, I'm sitting on a rock in front of a campfire. And one of our participants actually said, when he came back out, he said, that's the first time I've been to the bush since my injury. But he hadn't actually been, but that's how much it felt like that he had been to that place.
Oh, look at this. Here's the earth. You feel like getting off the chair and walking around.
Are you in space?
I am. This is cool. There's a planet there. Well, that's Earth. I can see, can't recognize it. Well, it's like Russia. And there's a planet here, I presume that's not Earth. Wow, awesome. Ah, look at that. You wouldn't want to be afraid of heights. Return to reality. That was cool. That was so awesome. Yeah. That was so awesome.
He feels like he's been on a journey. So that was at the end of last year. This year we've been working now on developing. So these visuals that you've seen are actually in VTime, which is a virtual reality application, and there's lots of different destinations that you can go to, the campfire and the space and lots of different places. We've now been working on developing our own virtual reality app, which is, we've got a couple of different destinations as well. The campfire still remains the favourite. It's very conducive to the sing-along, so that's good. And we've been working on ways to integrate lyrics into the... So when we were testing, we were just using songs that people could remember the chorus to, but now we've been able to get lyrics sort of projected up on the sky and scrolling so that we can have them in there with the guitar chords for me too, because you have to sort of play with your eyes shut almost. And working on getting the audio working. So we're just kind of moving it along. We're about to do some more testing with our newly developed app, but I haven't got anything to show you from that yet. So I just want to acknowledge the fantastic team that we've been working with. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me.
Alrighty, who's feeling like their mind has been blown with possibilities? So let's invite, Greg's putting his headset on so he can't see who's going. So let's invite all of our speakers up to the table for questioning. Greg, can you thought you'd take it off. I thought you might fall over if you try to do that.
Should I pass this around for people to try?
I reckon.
While we're having our discussion session. What I've loaded up here is a meditation app, which is kind of relevant. So it's pretty boring, but I'll start with the video.
Means we can all leave feeling very zen. That's good.
If you had a pause long from
that's right. We can all join in. So I wanted to have the campfire sing-along. I thought that we were promised demos. I want to have the campfire sing-along. All right, while Greg's getting that sorted, I'm going to be cheeky and jump in with the first question because it's something I would very much like to ask, and we'll come to the next if that's okay. My question is, clearly this is all cutting edge and extraordinary and making an enormous difference in people's lives. Has the limiting factor until now or until recently been the technology, or has it just been our imaginations and our ability to conceptualise that we could do these things? You know what I mean? Anyone who feels like...
I think it's probably been a little bit the technology, or definitely for our project, like getting that audio latency issue solved has been tricky, and probably also the cost and the fast, everything's updating so quickly and it's getting better, so keeping up to date with the latest options is another thing that's tricky, but possibly I would say a little bit it's been limited by technology up until this point, and we're just sort of riding that, fast explosion in technology.
I would agree. So the slide that I had about my background included a conference proceedings from 1997, and while I was preparing for this talk I had a flick through that book, and there were actually papers at that conference about virtual reality. So virtual reality has been around for a long time, but it hasn't been very good for a long time. So it's only recently that it's become a lot more, a lot better experience. You don't get so much of the vertigo that you often get in virtual reality, and it's a lot more accessible now. It's become cheaper, a lot more accessible, and that's opening up possibilities. Yeah.
We had a VR system in the computer science department here at Melbourne in the early 90s, and I had a very quick go of it. It was like this giant thing hanging down from the ceiling that you could have rested over your head, and you felt like if something broke you were going to die under this thing. And the realism of the visual scene was about the level of realism you get in Pac-Man. So very, very simple. And what's come out just in the last couple of years is these reasonably affordable. So our complete spend for our system, which is the high-end system, was I think about $2,500, and that includes a gaming PC. So if someone already has a decent gaming PC, for about $1,000 you can get a really great VR experience on top of that. So there's all sorts of research that's been stimulated by this sudden appearance of these affordable, high-quality systems.
Yeah, we've just got some to use in our first-year biology teaching because it's a great way of teaching students because they can actually go inside cells and learn all sorts of stuff. And so, it's expensive, but it's not prohibitively expensive. Yeah, fascinating.
Can I just be the voice of imagination in
yes,
there?
Surely it's something to do that.
And tell, it's a Greg story actually, but one of the things that we do with all our technology work is we involve young people in the planning and thinking and imagination part of the project. And when we had to do that for the VR project, we couldn't just talk to young people because they didn't know, trying to describe being in a VR space and what it's like, and asking them what mental health applications can you imagine from this process. That didn't work. So Greg had this wonderful idea of little dioramas with all these little people and lots of little models, and you got kids to model ideas of what to do for VR using a kind of a diorama type idea, which was a fantastic idea, and Clearly, Greg's got a great imagination. But those are the kinds of things we need to do, is we need to think outside the square, not just in the VR space, but even in planning how to do VR work, I think.
Yeah, because we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, we had a question here. Thank you.
I've got a question for Sarah and Greg. Young people you work with, are they participants or are they clients? Like, I'm just wondering if there are any convincing moments that you can go and, like, you know, or is it just a trial stage?
We're just at trial stage at the moment, so we would love to be able to do that, and in the future, hopefully, these kinds of apps will be out there in public clinics. But at the moment, we're trialling them in the clinics that our research centres are associated with. So that's Origin in Parkville, and some of the Headspace clinics around Western Melbourne. So, well, you can certainly get in touch and put names down for potential focus groups, or we're very interested in young people's participation. So if there are young people who are interested in being demos, then that might be able to be accommodated. Yeah. Yep. And our email addresses are on the slides, I think. So absolutely.
There you go. Yes, we have another question. Oh, perfect. We have a microphone.
Oh, thank you. Right through this, all this planning, there's a presumption of normal, and I use the word in a statistical sense. Who defines normal? So all the behaviours being shown, you're presuming a normality, and you're showing, especially in the therapeutic space, you're saying X is normal, I'll show it to you on the virtual reality. Who defines normal?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we've tried very hard to do with our system is to not necessarily, and this has been something that we've had to work long and hard on, is not necessarily to show, to have generic VR spaces. So, as you say, everyone is different, and that's one of the reasons that we were really wanting to be able to program in things like the young people's own thoughts. So we're not assuming that the thoughts that young people all have the same kinds of thoughts. People have very different thoughts.
And that's why I say statistically, normal is a statistical word.
Yep. So we're certainly, we try as much as we can, and also with the interactivity, because people can push away thoughts, pull thoughts towards them, they can play around with that, and they can get a sense of whether they are a pusher awayer of thoughts, or are they a puller towards-er of thoughts, and what does that mean for them? What effects does that have? So as much as we possibly can, we are saying, here are you, young person, you play around with this and work out what's normal for you in terms of your mind, and how might you want to change that in order to make life better?
Anyone else want to make a comment? No? Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name's Lisa Dethridge. I'm here from RMIT. What a great set of presentations, really interesting. I have a question that echoes the last. There is a quality of delusion, I think, that you could say affects people when they're in VR environments, because we are so willing to believe. I'm interested in each of you having a bash at describing, is delusion too strong a word? It's got something to do with the way our brain tricks us into thinking that what we're perceiving as real is real. What is that?
I'll go first. I think we're all very aware of that, and I think part of using VR in the health space is using that in a positive way, and being aware of the potential dangers as well. But so we're definitely aware of that, and our participants have described that in a positive way. So they're saying, I can't go and do these things, and it's amazing to feel like I can do that, to feel like I can move around or to feel like I can visit these places or feel like I've had an experience of being in nature. So I think that delusion aspect is definitely real, and people feel like, you could see one of our participants when he came back felt like he'd been on this journey to space and was almost exhausted by it, but, you know, had that real sense of having been there, which I think we actually trying to take and use in a positive way.
Yeah, I would add to that it can be a positive thing. One of the people that I spoke to who's using VR in aged care said that her favourite story about it was when her staff overheard a resident talking to a family member on the phone and saying, "I don't know where I went today, but it was wonderful." You know, so she had been on this journey and been out into the world. And yes, that might not be the real world, but it can be a positive experience nevertheless. But then again, it can also cause confusion, and that's why we need to tread cautiously.
In VR research, people talk about this state of presence, so that a good VR system is able to induce a sense that you are present in a place that you're not really in. And you can have very powerful experiences in VR, but I think that if you look at the way VR has been portrayed in science fiction, such as The Matrix, for example, there's this idea that we will become so deluded by our VR virtual experience that we kind of forget what's going on in the real world. And it's good to bear in mind that movies like The Matrix are in part talking about our already existing mediated experiences, such as the fact that we all watch television at night and we're being tricked into thinking in certain ways. As kind of that's the trope in sci-fi about VR. And it struck me recently that there's a really fantastic VR experience for the Vive called The Blue. And in this experience, you're underwater and there are fish swimming around you, and a giant blue whale comes up and sort of stares at you for a few minutes, and it's a really powerful experience. And I was having a go at this a few weeks ago, and it struck me while I was staring at this whale in the eye that at no point am I really tricked into thinking that I'm underwater, right? I'm not cold, I'm not wet, I'm standing, I'm experiencing my usual weight, you know. So I'm having this fantastic experience, a very powerful experience, but I'm not really thinking that I'm really underwater. And if you read the literature on VR and mental health, that's one of the features that the authors talk about, that the patient, the user can have a really powerful experience. They can re-experience something which has been traumatic for them in the past. But they know they're not really there. They know they're sitting in a doctor's office and this is a safe environment for them. Where this could potentially go wrong is in fact in the work that we're doing, because we're working, Sarah and I and our colleagues are working with people who have psychosis, and that by definition is a state of losing touch with reality and perhaps being caught up in a fantasy to the point where you think that it's real. So it's something that we have to be aware of.
We've actually got a question that came in on Twitter that speaks exactly to that. Thank you for the question. It was, since virtual reality is so realistic, is there actually a risk for those with mental illness of detachment or dissociation? It's exactly what you're speaking to.
It's an interesting question, and I think Sarah will have a more informed opinion than I. There's not too much said about this in the published literature, but I think that's partially because most of the VR and mental health work that's been done is not for people with psychosis or schizophrenia. So people with a phobia, they have not lost touch with reality, they're just overreacting to one portion of it. Talking with, one of the great things of working at the Origin Clinic is there's a group of young people there who are more or less ex-patients. I'm talking about the platform team. And they help us on our technology projects. So they try out our technologies and we get to talk to them in a conversational way, in a very informal way. And I spoke to a couple of people a few weeks ago who were using one of our apps. And they were talking about this. You know, they were saying, yeah, you know, think about people that hear voices, for example. This is a classic and very common delusion, if that's the right word, in psychosis. So people hear a voice, they genuinely hear it as though there is a person. They often imagine that the voice is an actual entity in the world who's speaking to them. Now, we can easily simulate that in VR. And Sarah and I were looking at a video the other day of a different system, but using avatar therapy to kind of embody that voice as something that the user can see on a screen and can sort of talk back to teach the person to fight back to this entity that's speaking to them. So could that get to the point where you're recreating an illusion and perhaps triggering something? I think this is what we're finding out in this project. I think an important safety mechanism that we've got is that we're not building something which is designed to be downloaded and used in the home. Our systems are designed to be used in the clinic. So the person who's experiencing this VR app has got the clinician sitting right there beside them. All of the usual safety mechanisms of the clinic are all there.
Do you want to add anything?
The thing that I would add is possibly a bit broader than that in terms of youth mental health, and that is that the young people that we see often, the real world is often very painful for them. Social situations and dealing with the world in all of its complexities is often very difficult. And so some young people find an escape in technology. So it may not be virtual technology, but it may be gaming or YouTube. And that can be a much more fun place to be for many young people with mental health problems. So VR has the potential to be that even more, to be even more immersing and engaging than gaming, say. And I think, therefore, to be a way for young people to have a rest from their painful lives, when our job is really to help them to build skills in order to make all the difficulties that they're experiencing easier to cope with in the real world. So you can see from what we're building that we are very clearly not building alternative realities. We're building tools that they can use to understand themselves better, that they can then use to get out there in the real world more. We're not building things that they can disappear into and be there for hours and hours. And I think that's probably, you'll find that everywhere that youth mental health goes will be much more about being very focused on how to learn more about themselves in order to be able to get out into the real world.
Yes, question, thank you.
Yeah, just following with that, I know it's early days, so it's probably hard to see the results, but what have you found, this science that you've done some testing, how have you found that these tools or therapies have worked?
Which one? Which project?
Anyone.
We should start with Jeanette. I think Jeanette's done the most empirical.
I'll go first. Our next plan is really to do a clinical trial using this virtual reality platform that we've developed. So at the minute it's been testing the feasibility and it's developing a proof of concept. So we've now got this thing that we're going to take back to some patients probably next month and say, how do you find this? How do you find this immersive VR experience in comparison to the same thing on a Skype-type platform versus sitting in a room together? And we're going to get them to compare those and really tease out what the differences is and the benefits and pitfalls of each of them. But I think the long-term goal is once we've got something that's a workable product, that we will use that in a clinical trial, and we'll get people to do a similar project where they do it on a regular basis and see if they can get the same effect on their voice and respiratory function and have the social benefits of feeling like they've been in the room together and sung with people when they're really isolated and they can do it from home. That's the next step.
Lost my train of thought now.
Want to go on?
Sure. Well, I haven't started evaluating how VR is working in this setting yet. It seems to, just from anecdotal evidence from talking to people, it seems to be something that is really a powerful tool in aged care. But I'm yet to do that research, so it's very much a future research So maybe, maybe sometime this time next year or a little bit later, I'll be able to report back on what the effects of the therapy are. Yep. Yeah.
Watch this space.
Yes.
Any other questions? Yes, thank you. Go up the back first and then down to the front.
I work for an organisation called TESCA. We support children with violent challenging behaviours and use martial arts therapy to engage the young people. So I'm just interested to know how might we be able to do something like virtual reality.
Wow. Sharon?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm thinking of lots of different ways.
Is it a mental health issue?
Lots of our young people do.
They would, yeah.
They might have a brain disorder through drugs, or they might be depressive, etc.
It's an interesting question, and the first thing that springs to my mind, and this is completely out of the blue, is your research, Jeanette, because that was it was a wonderful presentation, and when I saw that, I thought about all the kinds of groups of people that could be connected together in a safe way to do something together that we all really love to do. There are myriad possibilities, I think, for your young people, but one is singing together virtually. There are many others.
Is there a reason why you ask about virtual reality as opposed to real life? I mean, the reason that we've looked at virtual reality is because there are barriers to coming together in the same space. And I think, and there are some benefits, like people are saying, I feel less embarrassed to sing in virtual reality than I would in real life. But there are a lot of really amazing things about being together in the same space and having that eye contact and having to learn that social. It's a different type of.
Yes, well, we usually have our young people that just has to be one-on-one. And we work them towards being in a group and then work them towards going back into a class.
So it could be a stepping stone maybe in between one-on-one and then actually putting them into a physical group. Yeah. Experiment. Yeah. Yep.
Sounds like another project on the way. Right, we have time for one last question. Thank you.
So one of the aspects of VR is, of course, the presence that we have of being able to look around, you covered well there, and one is the social aspect. But so much of what we see and experience with people involves hand gestures, body language, the mouth tracking what they're saying, and eye contact, and we don't seem to get this. What sort of impact do you see that having on your research?
So are you talking about virtual people? So like what we call a non-player character in a video game, or are you talking about human-to-human?
For example, with the campfire one, you look around, you're sitting with people, but they're static. Their mouth isn't tracking what they're saying, their arms aren't moving. So you would see from rooms, I guess, some of the immersion factor you get with people.
Yeah. So within the technical side of VR, there are technical solutions to that being constantly worked on. So there's full body tracking, for example. This is just something that companies are working on. It's not a commercial product yet. So the idea that every movement you make in your physical body will be reflected in your virtual avatar, and then the avatars can have a very realistic conversation with each other. I know that I was doing research in Second Life 10 years ago, which Second Life was kind of trying to be what VR is now, and of course it was just a 2D flat screen. But even in those days, all of 10 years ago, there were systems being developed to try and allow more realistic tracking of the body, including down to eye movements and that kind of thing. But I don't know, I was always a little bit sceptical of that 10 years ago, because I think that part of the charm of being in the virtual environment is that it's not exactly the same as the physical environment. If you want to see every exact detail of the other person, then you can use Skype. whereas having VR gives a slightly fantastical version of the world, and allows us also as people to represent ourselves in ways that we want to be represented. So there's a lot of research into how people choose particular avatars and shape their own avatar in order to present a face to the world that they want to present. So this is, you can see it as a technical deficit, but it's also part of the appeal, I think, of VR, that it's not exactly real.
Yeah, I think from a musical perspective, it's really important to have some sense of movement in time with the music, and you do get that from the head movement, so the heads move in time, but there's still that latency because it's not the same as using the wired audio, but there is more of a sense of it being a real experience and a real interaction if you can see someone's head nodding when you speak to them and those types of things. And there are, gloves that you can use now too. And there are lots of musical creation things that you can do with gloves and in the Vive and things like that. We haven't really used those yet, but, it's all constantly evolving.
It's certainly something that it's something that our tech explorers have commented on. We've created an environment just to test things out and to test out their avatars that they created, where they sat around a pond and talked, and the inability to represent their facial expressions was a real inhibition in terms of making it feel as though they were actually in a social situation, and the tracking of the full body movements was quite rudimentary, and that was it wasn't a fantastic experience for them, but it was an interesting experience nonetheless.
All right, I imagine you all have more questions, because I certainly do, but we are out of time. So on behalf of the Melbourne Network Society Institute and the Melbourne Neuroscience Institute and the University of Melbourne, I'd like to thank you so much for coming today as part of our Science Festival.